Aloha! I'm Brad Bordessa and bringing you a special edition YouTube video requested by one of my followers slash watchers, subscribers. Did I say that already? This is the HX Stomp from line 6, and they were curious about seeing it and my opinions on it and maybe some sound samples. So we're gonna do all that, and I'm gonna tell you why I think that this is the best thing going as far as an all-in-one ukulele pedal. First of all, it's small. You see Jake and lots of other guys, they roll up with a pedal board in a bag or in a box. And I did that for years on and off with different setups, and it was always too big and I always hated it. I hated the idea of it. I liked the pedals on the board and having the different sounds and having the ability to turn knobs as I went, but just the size, form factor sucked. So when I saw this, I was immediately enthralled, you might say. It has 3 different foot switches that can be assigned to different effects to turn them on and off. You can also set it up so you have 2 effects on and off plus a tuner slash tap tempo. But inside the box basically is a computer, and everything's digital, but it sounds great. I know a lot of people will be hating on that. Like, oh, digital isn't as good as analog. Say what you will, this thing sounds fabulous in my opinion. And inside the box, you can currently with this firmware fit 6 different effects or amp models in a row in one preset that are all running at the same time. You can have basically as many presets as you want, but for me, I just have like my ukulele preset, and that's set up to make my ukulele sound as good as possible with whatever fairy dust sounds I want to have to go along with it. And so you turn those 2 on and off with a foot switch, and then you have a tuner for when you need to tune. As far as the space, it's great. I've downsized my rig for when I roll up to a gig. I have my ukulele and I have a like penguin carry box about yay big that this fits in, all my cables, a power strip, everything that I need, and I'm just 2 hands roll up to the gig and I can plug in and play and have a good sound. As far as the interface goes, it is a digital processor, so there's programming that needs to happen before you can really get your sounds. You can't just turn some knobs and get something that works, which is one drawback, but that's sort of the trade-off you get with something that is so compact and versatile, is that it does everything, but you have to sit and tell it to do everything. And so what comes with each of the Helix products is HX Edit, which is basically you take the computing from the box and cast it up onto your computer screen so that you can see things and use your mouse to edit presets, and it's a lot faster, it's a lot easier to visualize. So when I show you the sounds that I'm running and how I'm setting it up, we'll jump over there and have a peek on the computer. The sounds are the same, the interface will be a little bit different. As far as editing directly on the HX Stomp, you have a handful of knobs. They're mapped very cleverly. It's pretty intuitive to get the sounds just how you want once you figure it out. But just as far as being able to show you what I've got going, it's gonna be hard to point a camera at this little screen and get a clear shot. So I'm just gonna screenshot my computer and we'll go that way. So the box itself is pretty straightforward. You have your foot switches along the bottom. These 3 buttons or knobs along, buttons and knobs, along the bottom of the screen change the effect parameters. And then these 2 knobs here are push knobs, and they control kind of the navigation of getting around the different presets and programming the blocks, which the block is the effect unit inside the preset. So this is my main preset right here. If I click on the view button, I go in to kind of see the different effects blocks that I have in here. And so by scrolling back and forth with the top knob, you can see that I have an impulse response, an EQ, a little gain block, which I guess is my gain boost I've got going on there, a digital delay, and some reverb. And so for each of these, I can adjust the parameters by turning the knob. And then if I roll over to more settings with the page button, I can adjust these as well by scrolling through and then adjusting the knob again accordingly. So it's fairly straightforward and intuitive as you go through that. It's definitely a learning curve, but it's not as bad as some effects pedals that I've had in the past. As far as ins and outs, it's pretty universal, pretty useful. There's room for an expression pedal, so you can, or foot switches, so you can add the ability to either have like a wah-wah pedal or a volume pedal plugged in, or 2 extra foot switches for turning effects on and off. That kind of defeats the point for me, because then you're bumping up your footprint of the effects that you're trying to turn on, that you're bringing to the gig. And so usually I just don't bring those foot switches, but I do have them and it works great. Stereo in, stereo out, and then the USB, which I'll be using in a moment to show you guys the sounds by plugging it into my computer. The biggest complaint most people have about the HX Stomp is the big giant power supply. Plugs in here, it's nice, but the cable's too short, and on the other end you have a big monster of a sideways plug-in wall wart. And that's too bad, but really that's the only gripe I have about the thing. As far as other ins and outs, you do have options for stereo sends, returns, so an effects loop. There's also a headphone jack and MIDI compatibility if you're some kind of nerdy tech guru effects guy, which I am not. But yeah, otherwise fairly straightforward. There's a master volume knob or headphone volume knob. And yeah, really the main thing is the sound. So I want to get into the sound world, and we'll head over to my computer and I'll show you what we got. All right, here we are on my Mac. I'm recording the direct USB in from the HX Stomp into Cubase. So I'm getting my signal from the ukulele recorded straight into there. So we've got a clean audio that is just the HX Stomp, nothing else going on. And now this is HX Edit, and it does some other things that are a little more useful for organization, but really all we want here is to be able to visualize and see what the heck is going on in my preset. So this is the effects chain I've got set in the Stomp. It's just 5 different slots, 5 different things happening. I've had more complex presets in the past, but this one is really seems to be doing the trick. So I've got right at the beginning, I've got my signal splitting in half, and it's going, one side's going to an impulse response and the other side's going to an EQ. And the reason I'm doing that is because both sound nice, and I kind of want half and half of those nice sounds. The impulse response is basically a highly detailed EQ that I've rendered off of one of my microphones, and it replicates the microphone sound on the pickup signal of the ukulele. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to turn everything off one at a time. So as I add it in, you can hear what's happening. So this is the completely dry. That's just the bare pickup. But if I add in the IR, you can hear not all the sound, but some of the sound is getting a little bit more sparkly. There's a little bit more high end and I don't know, kind of interest to the sound, because it's taking that EQ curve from the microphone and rendering it onto the pickup sound. And so on the other half of my signal is going to an EQ, and unfortunately the edit program doesn't have any kind of real knob visualizations. They give you these sliders instead, but you can see the different numbers that are happening over here as far as what kind of cuts or adds I'm putting on this parametric EQ. The main thing is that you're hearing the sound and kind of how each of these affects the thing. If you really want to be nerdy about it and replicate it, pause the video and screenshot it, or whatever you need to do to try and see see these numbers here on the sides. But basically for the EQ, I've got a 3 dB cut at 230. That's kind of like the muddy zone for this ukulele. Is it on? Now it's on. So let's A/B these. So this is on with the impulse response. This is on and off. And then in the mids, I'm also scooping at 495, and that's it, I believe. There's a lot of stuff that I end up not even using on a lot of these effects just because they're so deep and they have so many options. So that's basically the EQ. That gets my signal into a nice polished sort of sound that's not gonna feedback like crazy, and it makes my ukulele sound just kind of as itself the best possible through a PA or a recording into the system. So what the IR does, I find, is it really kind of takes away some of the quackiness of the piezo pickup, and that's really nice. But if you just have the IR, like for instance, if I set the routing to be, I don't know which side is which. So that's 100% just to the EQ, I think. And this would be 100% to the IR. Quieter, but you can also hear that. It's a lot brighter. And so actually with this preset, I've found that if I lean a little bit more towards the EQ sound and just blend a little bit of the impulse response in, that's really nice. The next guy on the chain here is just a volume boost, just 3 dBs. So if I step on the pedal, I get just a little more volume if I want something to stand out or I need more power. Overall volume, I'll leave it off because that's its normal state. And then we have delay, which I am really liking the vintage digital delay. I actually remember that the first time I saw delay and heard it and really liked it was actually at the Kahumoku Ohana workshop many years ago when Kona Bob was jamming with this guy who had an old Ibanez digital delay, and it was like it had this kind of vintage gritty sound that was, you know, it was digital, but it had kind of this it was really vibey, and I've finally kind of found that sound again with the HX Stomp. It's part of the delay suite. So I've got it set so it's kind of dark. It's not super clear, but I like that with delays so that you're not getting buried. So let's see. On the side here are basically all of the delay options that you can have at any given point. So if I were to change that to a straight, simple digital delay, as you can hear, it's like really clean. It's an exact replica. But if I reload the preset to the digital vintage, it sits back in the mix quite nicely. I dig it. And so as far as the settings go, you know, 330 milliseconds, that's kind of the happy ballpark. I like 300 to 330 something milliseconds is usually a pretty universally useful musical time for a delay. And then I set the mix really low, just like so you can barely hear it. And the weird thing with delay-based effects is that they're different on every sound system. So if I was to roll up to a gig that was outside, this would almost certainly be too low, and I'd feel super naked and that the sound was really dry. But if you were inside, or if I was playing in my bedroom on an amp, you'd probably be able to hear the delay a lot better, and it might be more adequate. So I imagine on headphones or something, if you're listening, it'll seem like it's kind of loud, but if you're listening on like crappy computer speakers, you might not even be able to hear it and be like, oh, what is he talking about? But anyways, that's the delay. And then the reverb, I guess I just have a chamber with those settings. And so if I bring it in, the one thing that I haven't really found yet is a super great reverb sound on this thing. There's been a lot of discussion about how that's kind of the one effect set that's a little bit more lacking than others, is that you have a lot of the legacy Line 6 stuff that you would get in like the M9, or I had the M5 at one point, and these are all the same reverbs that were on that. So they're pretty old at this point. And there are some newer ones that they created for it, but there's nothing like plain in the new ones. It's all fancy ambient stuff that they put in there. So I just run the legacy ones and would like an upgrade, but they do the trick. Really, if you're playing live, no one's gonna care what your reverb sounds like. The only time you're gonna notice it is if you're like at Carnegie Hall or something and the acoustic guitar is mic'd up and you're hearing the sound of the hall. It's like, oh, well, the reverb sounds good. It's like, yeah, of course it does. It's Carnegie Hall or some theater anywhere. But as far as like a plugged in sound, reverb is the least of your concerns. Just put something on there. So now let me show you what we're working with kind of from end to end of the before and after of the Stomp and its processing power. I'm going to turn off everything, so we're just getting the dry sound, and now the everything on sound. And if you wanted to get more crazy, you could do any number of things. You have, say I have an empty block in my preset right here. I could choose any of these different effect blocks to throw in there. And remember, this is just the computer-based visual representation that I'm working with here, and that all this can be done on the unit. It's just way harder to show in a video. So there's all kinds of like distortions. This might be loud, and it's not going to be any kind of optimized, but you know, all this kind of stuff. That's not very much gain. Maybe something more like this. You got all of that kind of garbage, and there's compressors. Some really nice different compressors on here, though I don't know how much you'd actually use that for ukulele. The EQ, there's a simple EQ, which is low gain, high gain, and then you have a parametric, semi-parametric mid. And then there's like a tilt, which is basically just a tone knob where you go highs, lows, and then some other options. Of course, there's parametric. And modulation, pick your poison, tremolo, phasers, chorus, flangers. I'll try and link all the specs in the video description so you can see all the different models that are here. But really, there's more stuff than any normal person would ever use. Something to note is that this is version 2.92, which is the bug fix, I guess. But Line 6 continues to update this software. And because the HX Stomp is basically a piece of software, you get new blocks, new effects, new amps, and new features when they release new firmware. So it's kind of one of those things. I've jumped in, I think, at like 2.6, and there's been 3 different updates where there's been new stuff added. And I'm like, oh, wow, my $600 just grew a little bit. Now I have, you know, even more value, even more stuff that I can do in this pedal. Like 3.0, the rumor has it that there's going to be polyphonic pitch shifting, which means you could play a chord and use an octave on the chord so that the chord is an octave lower or higher, and that it'll track the entire chord instead of just crapping out and trying to track only one of the notes in the chord. And the Stomp is also going to get 2 extra block slots. So instead of being limited to 6 different effects blocks, you'll now have 2 more that will fit somewhere in here, provided you have the DSP computer processing power to make them run. Most of the ukulele stuff that you're going to do if you're just going for a typical acoustic sound isn't going to take up that much processing power, and you should be able to use the 8 blocks if you need them. It's more like the amp models and some of the more fancy reverbs that really suck up the processing power, and so guitarists are going to complain about running out of room a lot faster than ukulele players. But there is so much in here. It's so deep. There's so many routing options, foot switch options. Really, the sky is the limit. I haven't really ran into anything that I couldn't do. Sometimes you just have to be clever about it and figure out what your approach is going to be, but it can be mostly done on here. If you want to know more, there's tons and tons of videos of different guitar guys running through deeper details. Jason Sadites does really good breakdowns of how to actually use the different blocks and how to adjust them for different things. Of course, it's all guitar based, but if you're diving into effects at this level, learning from guitar stuff shouldn't bother you at all. I super dig it. Yeah, there's not really much that I can complain about, except maybe that I didn't get the white one. The white one looks so much better than the black one. Why wasn't that available when I bought it? Oh well. If you're in the market, you can get a white one. I believe there's also a blue version, maybe from like Guitar Center or something. There's different special limited edition. There might be a red. Pick your poison, people. It's pretty great. You know, the price tag is kind of scary, but like for me, this really just does it all. I can sell all the rest of my stuff, and I have been selling a lot of my other pedals just because I don't need them. And I would buy this again in a heartbeat if the one I have had any kind of trouble or I spilled my coffee on it or something. So there you have it. Not a super engaging ukulele video, but some of my thoughts on the HX Stomp by Line 6. Highly recommended. It's done me really well. If you're interested in high-level, programmable, compact effects. If you are just getting started in effects, this is way more money than you should be thinking about spending, because, you know, a lot of times people don't even know if they like the sounds that they might get from a pedal like this. So instead, you know, buy a cheap Boss multi-effects or a cheap Zoom multi-effects, or even there's like, if you can get your ukulele sound into your iPad, there's lots of different apps that will let you put the effect sounds on a signal, like amplitude, or Axe Rack, or I don't know. There's a bunch of different stuff that have these sounds, and you can kind of sample them before you go out and shell out for a $600 Line 6, because this is definitely kind of a performing grade piece of equipment. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it if you're just jamming in your bedroom, but if you need all the tools, definitely check it out. I will reiterate that the IR, the impulse response, was the blessing in disguise that I didn't even know about really before I got the pedal, and then it was like, oh, it has support for this, let me try it out. And so I figured out how to make them. There's an article on my website, liveukulele.com, about making the impulse responses, and it kind of blew my mind. It was like so night and day the different sounds I could get and how much clearer I could get my pickup sound just by using this impulse response. And if you don't have the Stomp, I believe LR Bags just came out with a pedal that does that, but there's only like a couple options, 1 or 2, maybe 3 different options at the moment that are like convenient ways to load an impulse response into your signal. So just having that feature along with all the effects is like, well, if I'm really attached to this technology now, which I am, I would hate to have to run without it, then, you know, you'd be adding a whole nother pedal to your mix, more space on your pedal board, more overhead, more things to break. So for me, that was really an exciting find. Anyways, thank you for viewing my desktop. here in Ahualoa, Hawaii. My name's Brad. Subscribe to the channel. Check out my ebooks on liveukulele.com. I have a pair on left hand and right hand technique, kind of encyclopedias of everything you need to know to powerhouse your ukulele and play it more efficiently and easier. And then also my long-standing favorite, mine and my buyer's favorite, ukulele chord shapes. It's like the neo-traditional chord reference book. It's a little bit different, but fairly highly regarded by most people. Please check those out if you like what I do. Support the site, support the channel, and I'll see you in the next video or see you on the website. Until next time, stay safe out there, and aloha.